currently a year 13 student, which basically means I'm living inside a constant blur of deadlines, mock exams, and caffeine-sponsored all-nighters, while still attending school clubs and having a social group. As you can see on the screen is the image of me studying for my life. And if you pay really close attention, you would see the image of a correction tape appear in almost every single footage. And here's some typical examples of what my work would look like. A complete mess covered with seemingly beautiful correction tape. People often say that year 13 is the most important year of our lives. And I think that it's true. But to me as a student, after going through all the chaos and constant self-doubt, I think that it's also the most confusing year. Because this year, I'm standing right at intersections. I feel like I'm in the middle of a crossroad where I have to start making decisions for my life. For example, choosing what major that I want to start to study in university, or which region I want to study, in what region I want to study, spend the next 4 years of my life in. Therefore, today, in this talk, I want to bring light to a topic that no one really talks much about, the behind the scenes of a student life, and the reasons why the actual learning process matters much more than the result itself. Let me tell you a story. When I first entered Utah, which is the first year of A-levels, I thought to myself, this year, I'll try my everything to make this a perfect year and keep it all under control. Well, how hard can it be, right? After all, I'm that kid who got full A stars in IGCSE, and nothing could have gone that wrong. I spent the summer planning everything I could think of. Writing study goals, reading the first 2 chapters of business, watching YouTube videos on how to study better and get straight A's. And I don't know, YouTube videos on how to get into Ivy Leagues. I bet some of you in here did that too, right? I even did something that was quite unique and brave of me at the time. I emailed my new teachers that I have never met them before for some prior reading resources on English literature, a subject that I think was pretty challenging at the time. And as you can see on the screen, it's a snapshot of my message to my teacher. At that time, my inexperienced and ambitious self thought that I could handle it all. SAT, A-levels, IELTS. And like all of that wasn't enough, I even studied 2 AP classes outside of school while applying for the head student title. But then, reality hits. At the end of December last year, which translates to the end of term 1 in my year 12, I was completely drowned, tired, and exhausted from all the extra tasks that I have added for myself. All due to my unrealistic and the overestimated my actual ability plan of mine. Suddenly, I wasn't the perfectly imagined version of myself. I was just me, a student who's constantly trying, falling, and rising again. And it all repeated in a cycle. It struck to me now that I'm a year 13 student, that study isn't a straight road. It's a journey with a lot of ups and downs. And sometimes the best thing you can do is to allow yourself to be a work in progress. Of course, in my study journeys, there are days when everything seems to fall into place. For example, when a concept finally clicked, or when I suddenly have a spark in my brain and wrote an amazing English lit essay. Or when I suddenly understand the logic behind a math question that, well, used to look like ancient language to me. But as much as I wanted, those days don't tend to stay for long. Let me tell you what's an average day of an A-level student. I would wake up, go to school, get into lessons, where I don't really want to admit this, but I would get into lessons that I don't really understand anything from the lecture. And coming back home in my little study space, I would revise all the content all over again, desperately trying to consume knowledge. At first, it felt weird. It feels like I was overwhelmed, and it feels like I was overwhelmed. And I don't really know, and I started to have these thoughts of maybe I'm just a failure, and that I'm the only one who's falling behind. However, in one of my desperate late night Google searches for how to study better and get straight A's, I stumbled on a term that I somehow never paid attention to before: the learning curve. Now, you might ask, what in the world is the learning curve? Well, the learning curve is a scientific idea that says that whenever we learn something new, our progress slows down right at the beginning. That does not mean that we're bad at it. It means that our brain is building the foundations from scratch, and this takes time. Researchers describe this early stage as the part where everything feels slow, messy, and painfully confusing. But that actual confusion is actually the evidence that our brain is wiring new pathways. And so, you can see a visual representation of this on the screen. And so, the moment I understand this, everything changed. I suddenly realized that learning is not supposed to be easy from the beginning. It's supposed to be hard. Therefore, whenever I sit at my desk feeling unsure, overwhelmed, and in doubt of myself, I would stay still and remind myself that this is growth, and this is how the learning curve actually works. And it's interesting that the more that I pay attention to my own learning curve, the more that I realize that the spaces in between that were supposedly my failures was actually the building of me. And then I came into a realization that school doesn't just teach you content, it teaches you who you are when content falls apart. And let me tell you a truth that no one tells you in school. You don't become resilient from getting things right. You become resilient from all the times that you don't. And trust me, year 13 is full of those moments. It could be when you've received a shocking grade, or when you've thought that you've understand a concept, but, well, you clearly did not. And as an English literature student, I deeply relate to this. There was once that I wrote an unseen commentary that I thought was brilliant, the best piece of work that I've ever produced. Well, it turned out that it was not brilliant. I have completely misunderstood the context, and I was shocked. The moment I see my grades, I was shocked and in disbelief. And I even have these thoughts of, I started questioning that whether everything that I've done before was even right. That moment was surely uncomfortable for me, but it is in that exact moment that it changes me. It stripped me down to the version of myself who is still learning, still stretching, and still choosing to forgive my mistakes to build a better version of me. And in a weird way, I think that this moment matters more than the A's. Because results, no matter how important they are, only show you who you were on one particular day, in one particular hour, and in one particular room. But the person that you become through the process, through all of the ambiguity, through all of the confusion, through all of the times when you wanted to give up, but you still try to push through anyway, that person stays. And something else that I learned along the lines of my so-called study career is that your worth cannot be tied to one score. Because the moment when you let one grade define you, because the moment when you hang your worth on a grade, learning becomes a burden instead of a journey. Let me tell you another story where I deeply relate to this. Back in year 10, when I was still an IGCSE student, I was the type of student who craves for perfect grades, and I subconsciously associated my self-worth to the score that I get. So whenever I have a bad grade, it would feel like my whole identity had broken down, and I would feel like I'm worthless, but actually I'm not. And so I came into a realization that, standing here as a year 13 student, I wish that someone had told me this before. That when you let your worth hangs on every grade, the learning journey becomes a burden. But the truth is, learning is messy, and it forces you to be bad at something long enough to finally become good at it. And that's the reason why I think that the spaces in between are much more important than the actual result itself. It's in the mornings when you wake up to study, even though you're tired. It's in the afternoons when nothing feels like it's making any sense to you, but you're still trying. It's in the evenings when you're tired, when you're exhausted, but you still manage to push through just to be proud of yourself. Those moments count. Those moments shape you. Those moments matter. Because at the end of year 13, it's not the grade boundaries that you remember. It's not how many hours that you have studied. It's not going to be even the final results sheet. But most importantly, it will be the story of the person that you became. And so, I want to leave you guys with this note. That learning isn't a straight line. It's a continuous journey with lots of ups and downs, and everyone has a different learning curve. And it's important to acknowledge that learning curve and to stay true to yourself and stay kind to yourself when things get loud. And always remember that learning is not a straight line. And to always remember that progress might not always be visible, but it will always be happening. And one day, when you look back at your learning journey, when the grades are all long forgotten, you will realize that the spaces in between, the ambiguity regions, all the times that you feel all the confusion in the world, weren't really just spaces. They weren't failures, but they were the actual making of you. Oh. Thank you.